There is a myth that there is an ideal cybersecurity framework, and this video will help explain the realities of selecting the most appropriate framework for your specific needs. First off, let's address the somewhat contentious word framework, since some people have strong feelings about what is and is not a framework. When you objectively define the word framework, it is quite simply a conceptual structure that serves as a guide to build something. A control set can be considered a framework, just as a law, regulation, or other contractual obligations, since those all serve as a guide to build secure, or at least compliant, systems, applications, services, and practices. One of the most common questions we receive is, what framework is best for my organization? When you take a step back and look at the question, the concept of a best cybersecurity framework is misguided, since the most appropriate framework to align with is entirely dependent upon your business model. Defining just right for your cybersecurity and data privacy controls is primarily a business decision, based on your organization's risk profile, which needs to consider applicable laws, regulations, and contractual obligations that are required to support existing or planned business processes. The applicable laws, regulations, and contractual obligations that your organization must comply with will most often point you to one of 5 starting points to kick off the discussion about which leading cybersecurity framework is most appropriate for your needs. This comes down to evaluating the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or NIST CSF as it is commonly referred to, ISO 27001 and 27002, NIST 800-171, NIST 853, or the Secure Controls Framework. There are others, but this video focuses on those 5 leading frameworks. When you graphically depict the various leading cybersecurity frameworks from easier to harder, it primarily focuses on the sheer number of unique cybersecurity and data privacy controls. We refer to it as the cybersecurity Goldilocks dilemma, since organizations struggle with finding a cybersecurity framework that is not too hard, not too soft, but just right for their specific needs. To solve this, it comes down to first defining your must-have and then nice-to-have requirements, since that helps point you to the most appropriate framework for your specific needs. When you dig into the details of these frameworks, you will find the number of included controls directly impacts the number of domains covered by a specific framework. The lesser number of controls in a framework might make it appear easier to implement, but it also might not provide the necessary coverage that your organization needs from the perspective of administrative, technical, and physical cybersecurity and data privacy practices. This brings up the root issue of defining what is most appropriate for your organization, based on must-have and nice-to-have requirements. If you are like many people, you may be thinking, hey, this is great information, but how do I actually apply it to my situation? This is where we get to the concept of defining your minimum security requirements, or MSR, which are made up of a combination of both your must-have and nice-to-have requirements. This can be considered a combination of your mandatory and discretionary requirements, where minimum compliance requirements, or MCR, establish must-have requirements that are defined by applicable laws, regulations, and contractual obligations that your organization must comply with. Conversely, discretionary security requirements, or DSR, establish nice-to-have requirements that are not legally required but you feel you require to be secure. Examples of DSR can be technologies such as file integrity monitoring, data loss prevention, or other solutions that enhance security, but are not legal obligations to implement. Those 2 considerations come together to address the compliant versus secure balancing act that determines if an organization's cybersecurity and data privacy program will be both secure and compliant, or just compliant, where it focuses solely on the bare minimums. In reality, lesser mature organizations tend to focus on compliance over security, whereas more mature organizations tend to focus on making compliance a natural byproduct of being secure. This concept is further explained in the Integrated Controls Management, or ICM, model, where MCR are primarily externally influenced, based on industry, government, state, and local regulations. MCR should never imply adequacy for secure practices and data protection, since they are merely compliance-related. As for DSR, those are primarily internally influenced, based on the organization's respective industry and risk tolerance. While MCR establish the foundational floor that must be adhered to, DSR are where organizations often achieve improved efficiency, automation, and enhanced security. There are 3 straightforward questions that can help quickly narrow down what is an appropriate or inappropriate cybersecurity framework based on your specific needs. Question 1. Do you store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information? If yes, look at NIST 800-171, NIST 853, or the Secure Controls Framework. If no, proceed to Question 2. Question 2. Do you need to speak NIST 853 for a contract? If yes, look at NIST 853 moderate or high baselines. If no, proceed to Question 3. Question 3. Do you have complex compliance requirements such as multiple cybersecurity and data privacy requirements? If yes, look at the Secure Controls Framework. If no, look at NIST CSF or ISO 27001 and 27002. This graphic is available under the Start Here section on the ComplianceForge website. If you are still unsure where to start, follow these steps. Step 1. Start off with having a discussion with your legal and procurement departments to find out what laws, regulations, and contractual obligations your organization needs to comply with. If they don't know, then you need to perform that discovery with their involvement to ensure you have the facts and to avoid working off assumptions. Step 2. Evaluate your organization's business and IT strategies to identify components that may require the adoption of a specific framework. For example, your CEO puts out a roadmap to grow business, and next year the company will start going after U.S. government and Department of Defense contracts, and this means your organization will have to address cmmc compliance. This means alignment with NIST 800-171, NIST 853, or SCF might be the best path forward. For another example, a business unit is expanding into the European market and will focus on business-to-consumer sales. This means your organization will have to address the EU's General Data Protection Regulation for robust privacy practices, on top of cybersecurity. This means you could select any framework to address underlying cybersecurity practices, but you need a privacy program. The SCF might be the best path forward. Step 3. Talk with peers in your industry to identify what framework their organization chose to align with and what those decisions were that led them to adopting one framework over another. You still have to do your own analysis to determine what is right, but talking with peers can help avoid reinventing the wheel on certain aspects of the analysis process. Step 4. Determine what resources you have available to adopt and implement a framework. If it is a flip of the coin decision between two frameworks where you feel both meet your needs, you need to be sure to take into account which framework will be the most efficient to implement and maintain. Step 5. If all else fails, speak with a reputable consultant. Not all cybersecurity professionals have the same backgrounds, experiences, and competencies. Speak with a governance, risk, and compliance professional about compliance-related frameworks and scoping decisions. We understand that it can be a little confusing when you look at it from a heat map perspective, since each cybersecurity framework has its own unique scope of applicability, or specialization, and depth of coverage. However, understanding this can help you make an informed decision on where to start for the most appropriate framework or combination of frameworks for your needs. You may even find you need to leverage a meta-framework to address more complex compliance requirements. Before picking a framework, it is important to understand that each one has its benefits and drawbacks. Therefore, your choice should be driven by the type of industry your business is in and what laws, regulations, and contractual obligations your organization needs to comply with. If you look at this from the perspective of a debate over which soft drink tastes better, such as Coke versus Pepsi, it generally comes down to personal preferences since both products are essentially sugary carbonated drinks and only differ slightly in flavor and packaging. The same arguments can be made for cybersecurity's two heavy hitters, NIST 853 and ISO 27002. Gaining popularity is the NIST CSF, but it lacks appropriate coverage out of the box to be considered a comprehensive cybersecurity framework. For more complex compliance requirements, the SCF is a meta-framework that encompasses over 100 laws, regulations, and frameworks in a hybrid framework that can span multiple compliance requirements. If you are not familiar with the Secure Controls Framework, it was developed with the ambitious goal of providing a comprehensive catalog of cybersecurity and data privacy control guidance to cover the strategic, operational, and tactical needs of organizations, regardless of the size, industry, or country of origin. By using the SCF, your cybersecurity, legal, technology, and project teams can speak the same language about controls and requirement expectations. The SCF is a meta-framework, which is a framework of frameworks, which means it is a best-in-class approach that covers over 100 cybersecurity and data privacy laws, regulations, and frameworks, including NIST 853, ISO 27001 and 2, and NIST CSF. Being a hybrid, it allows you to address multiple cybersecurity and data privacy frameworks simultaneously. Fundamentally, the SCF focuses on internal controls, which are the cybersecurity and data privacy-related policies, standards, procedures, and other processes that are designed to provide reasonable assurance that business objectives will be achieved and undesired events will be prevented, detected, and corrected. The SCF is a free resource for businesses to use, but it is more commonly used by medium to large businesses. However, it can be used by any business with complex cybersecurity and data privacy requirements. As a quick recap, the SCF can be used for any sized business and any industry. The SCF realistically should not be used for simple compliance needs, since it may be overkill. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is on the fifth revision of Special Publication 853, Security and Privacy Controls for Information Systems and Organizations. From Revision 4 to Revision 5, NIST dropped the U.S. government focus and now has it generalized enough for private industry to use. There are still NISTisms specific to wording that is entirely U.S. government focused, but it is a significant improvement for private industry adoption. NIST 853 best practices are the de facto standard for private businesses that do business with the U.S. federal government. One thing to keep in mind is that NIST 853 is a superset of ISO 27002, and that means you will find all the components of ISO 27002 covered by NIST 853. However, ISO 27002 does not cover all of the areas of NIST 853. The Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA, and the Department of Defense Information Assurance Risk Management Framework, or RMF, rely on the NIST 853 framework, so vendors to the U.S. federal government must meet those same requirements in order to pass these rigorous certification programs. NIST 853 includes what both ISO 27002 and NIST CSF address, as well as a whole host of other requirements. NIST 853 is the basis for the controls found in NIST 800-171 and cmmc. NIST 853 is commonly found in the financial, medical, and government contracting industries. One great thing about NIST 853, and it applies almost universally to all NIST 800 series publications, it is freely available, at no cost to the public. This framework is commonly used by defense contractors, government contractors, technology-focused businesses, general businesses, healthcare organizations, as well as the financial and insurance industries. Realistically, NIST 853 should not be used for smaller or medium businesses, since it may be overkill. It all depends on their specific compliance obligations, so even a small or medium business may have to lift that weight to implement and comply with NIST 853. The U.S. National Archives, or NARA, runs the Controlled Unclassified Information Program for the U.S. government. NARA specifies NIST 800-171 and 800-171 alpha as the minimum requirements to protect CUI. NIST 800-171 is the basis for the controls used by the U.S. Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. As with other NIST publications, it is freely available, at no cost to the public. NIST 800-171 can be used by any sized organization, since it is the required set of controls necessary to protect CUI where it is stored, processed, and/or transmitted. The International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, is a non-governmental organization that is headquartered in Switzerland. ISO can be a little more confusing for newcomers to cybersecurity or compliance, since a rebranding occurred in 2007 to keep ISO's cybersecurity-related documents in the 27000 series of their catalog. ISO 17799 was renamed and became ISO 27002. To add to any possible confusion, ISO 27002 is a supporting document that aids in the implementation of ISO 27001. Adding a little more confusion to the mix, it is important to note that companies cannot certify against ISO 27002, just ISO 27001. Appendix A of ISO 27001 contains the basic overview of the security controls needed to build an Information Security Management System, or ISMS, but ISO 27002 provides those specific controls that are necessary to actually implement ISO 27001. Essentially, you can't meet ISO 27001 without implementing ISO 27002. To keep things simple, just remember that ISO 27001 lays out the framework to create an ISMS, which is a comprehensive IT security program. Whereas ISO 27002 contains the actual best practices details of what goes into building a comprehensive cybersecurity program. Since ISO's cybersecurity framework has been around since the mid-1990s, it was in right time at the right place to evolve into the de facto cybersecurity framework outside of the United States. This is why you will find ISO 27002 extensively used by multinational corporations and for companies that do not have to specifically comply with U.S. federal regulations. ISO 27002 is also less paranoid than NIST 853, which has an advantage of being less complex and therefore easier to implement. One unfortunate thing about ISO 27001 and 2 is that ISO charges for its publications. This cost consideration is a factor that organizations have to consider, since there is a cost to obtain the documentation, unlike with NIST or the SCF that are free to download. ISO 27002 is commonly used by medium to large businesses and is internationally recognized. However, due to how NIST 800-171 and cmmc are written, ISO 27002 is not a viable solution out of the box for U.S. government contractors that handle CUI. Any adoption of ISO 27002 would need to be added onto to meet the stringent requirements for CUI protections. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or NIST CSF, has the least coverage of the major cybersecurity frameworks. NIST CSF can work great for smaller and unregulated businesses that just want to align with a recognized cybersecurity framework. The downside to the NIST CSF is that its brevity makes it incompatible with common compliance requirements, such as NIST 800-171, EU GDPR, and PCI DSS, depending on the SAQ level. Overall, NIST CSF does not introduce new standards or concepts, but leverages and integrates industry-leading cybersecurity practices that have been developed by organizations like NIST and ISO. NIST CSF is organized into 5 categories of controls: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. The NIST CSF comprises a risk-based compilation of guidelines that can help organizations identify, implement, and improve cybersecurity practices, and creates a common language for internal and external communication of cybersecurity issues. The NIST CSF is designed to evolve with changes in cybersecurity threats, processes, and technologies. NIST CSF envisions effective cybersecurity as a dynamic, continuous loop of response to both threats and solutions. In reality, NIST CSF is a dumbed-down and civilianized version of NIST 853. It came out nearly a decade ago when NIST 853 was entirely focused on the U.S. government, so there was a need for a subset of the controls that NIST 853 provided but for the non-enterprise space in private industry, such as tailored for small to medium businesses. Over the past decade, different U.S. federal agencies have published documents describing how NIST CSF controls can be leveraged to comply with HIPAA, FINRA, etc. There are significant downsides, such as the framework implementation tiers should be avoided since it is bad guidance. For example, you have to get to Tier 3 before you document policies, standards, or procedures. That means a business at Tier 1 and Tier 2 would be considered negligent for failing to meet reasonable expectations for a security program. This is an example of the path to hell is paved with good intentions, so that component of NIST CSF should be avoided. NIST CSF is commonly used by smaller businesses and unregulated industries. However, due to how NIST 800-171 and cmmc are written, NIST CSF is not a viable solution out of the box for U.S. government contractors that handle CUI. Any adoption of NIST CSG would need to be added onto to meet the stringent requirements for CUI protections. We hope that you've benefited from this video. If you need editable, professionally written policies, standards, procedures or other solutions to comply with NIST CSF, ISO 27001 or 2, NIST 800-171, NIST 853 or the SCF, we have solutions to fit your needs and budget. If you have any questions, please reach out to us.